hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had a lot of time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently as something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound the frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangled over his upturned face, popped. Well, he was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, and his entrails lying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was the shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence, tags, or marks. And the angle was completely off from the shot designed by the evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, in half body and frame. This was what appeared to be the blood running down from his eyes. The blood was also done in high realistic style, looking as if you could touch it, and if you do, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing, a deep baritone lasting at longer intervals and becoming more frequent. After about 20 seconds, the screen twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. But he knew he had to. This time the photo that appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her parents in a pool of blood next to her. Her eyes too popped and popped, naked except for her underpants. Her nails were piled on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape of the first. I had to choke back vomit. And one intern. The only female in the room ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound. Like it was the scene started. He put his tentacle down on his face and done hyper-realism like the others were beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and the fear induced all of his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy about the same age. But this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from the stomach, and a wound by a large hand. The red eye popped and dangling. Blood trickling down, and the animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but The next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. We went on to the next. Same thing. He was back at the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor, the animating and the sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They played out as if the frames of a video. We saw the hands slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why we called him down here. So the editor just continued the episode. Once a few frames were shown, all the screaming, all the sound again stopped. Squidward just stared at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. Then, shortly, the shot quickly panned out to a deep voice and said, "Do it!" And we see in Squidward's hand a shotgun. He immediately put the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Realistic blood and brains splattered the walls behind him and his bed. And he flies back with a force. The last 5 seconds of this episode showed the body of the bed. On his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us left to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served that to imprint this entirety of it in my mind because the horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory I could think of was the file was edited by someone in a chain for the drawing studio to hear. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by a new material. However, the timestamp of it was mere 24 minutes before we began watching it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the stamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time. But we checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came out of it. No child scene was identified, no clues were gathered from the data, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in the unexplainable phenomenon before. But now I have to say, I have something happen. I can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal, that word, evidence. I think twice about things.